Hi, Ben.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, welcome to the next Azure deep dive session. There's a lot longer. We're just having a discussion here in the room about what its actual really long title is, but this is an Azure deep dive session. I'm glad you guys are here. So my name is Jeff DeVerter, and I've been hosting a few of these. Today I have the illustrious
Benjamin Villanueva.
Yeah, I just couldn't say the last name as cool as you say it.
No.
I would have.
People have tried and they failed.
They've actually injured themselves, I think, in the process. So Benjamin V. I'll call
there you go.
So welcome. So today, we're announcing ourselves because because our name is our identity.
Exactly.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
So today's session is about managed identity. It's about what an identity means for the cloud and why that's important. And we're going to talk today about defining that. We're going to give some examples. We're going to talk about trends that are happening out today in tech land around identity and why it's important. Because I'll be honest with you, true confessions, a year ago, identity, I knew it was important, but I didn't realize it was extraordinarily important. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about who we are. And for those of you who watched a few of these, my name is Jeff DeVerter. I'm the Chief Technologist for Microsoft offerings here at Rackspace. And that means ultimately that I get to think about what's coming down the road about a year off or farther, and then help work with our product teams to help figure out what is going to be most important for our customers and help get that then implemented out for things that we can help support. In the process of all that, it gives me the opportunity to look at a lot of different technologies, both inside and outside of what happens in the Microsoft world, to look where either Microsoft is following, look where Microsoft is leading, and get to speak to that. And then, of course, talk to customers, and understand what their needs are. Because that's really the balance, not just what's the new and shiny thing, but also, what's needed. Where's business driving that sort of stuff. I've been at Rackspace about 8 years. It'll be 8 years in May, end of May. So we're almost there.
Wow.
And
it's a good tenure.
8 year. And I've had a lot of different roles here at Rackspace, ultimately launching different types of products. And now I get to think about that Microsoft wide. Ben, you've been here
almost a year now.
Almost a year.
Yeah.
Which is exciting. So came in to be
exciting.
This overall Azure sort of thing, but have kind of fallen into the old, I don't want to say what's comfortable, but where your roots are.
Where my roots are, exactly.
Talk about those roots.
So I'm originally from Honduras, and that's where my last name is from. So I moved here about 15 years ago.
Okay. With
one goal in mind, and that was, hey, I think this thing called identity is cool.
15 years ago, you're thinking this.
I'm thinking this. I was like, I think that, and I'm probably the only person or probably one of the few people that actually think that identity is something fun to talk about or something fun to do. So I started that.
So doing some basic math. That's 2001.
Basic. That was back when they started doing Active Directory, we were doing NT40 and doing Windows 2000. And so it's one of those things that I just started from my very beginning, started working with these ones. And I've had the privilege of working with some really large companies during my time. And during my time, I've actually had a Microsoft Certified Master in Directory Services.
Impressive.
And then recently, I got my Microsoft Certified Solutions Master in Directory Services as well.
That's amazing.
And everything that I do has been revolved around identity.
So what you're saying is, a little bit of something around technology-based identity.
Just a little bit. I mean, I've been working with it so long that it's just part of my nature. And I think that that's where we're coming today is, as part of my nature, I want to share some of those things, some of the things that I've seen, some of the things that I've learned along the way, and what the trend that I see, because I'm so excited about the trend of what it's looking like and how identity is transforming the world and the people and how they use technology, that I think is just a fascinating topic to talk about.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned earlier that a year ago, I didn't necessarily think about it being something so strategic. In fact, the way that if I were to think of a phrase to describe it, I would say it was a necessary evil. So I come out of the SharePoint backdrop. And in that context, we had to have Active Directory, because Active Directory is where all of the service accounts for SharePoint lived, and we needed those in a common location because this was a distributed application. And that's then also where all of the user identities would go. So we had two different types of identities that were going into AD. We had service accounts that had different rights and permissions, and then we had end user accounts. And we use those then to, one, keep the platform running, and then two, be able to control who had access to what. So in that context, we had to have it. It's just what made it run. Once we had that in place, it's kind of like plumbing. Plumbing's in place, then you can enjoy the rest of the application. But more and more, and I've never seen a technology come from the background to the foreground. You've gone from being the guy who takes care of the plumbing stuff to now being the most important guy in the room.
Yep.
Around an application that has become key to what's happening in technology today, which goes back to all things cloud.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole purpose, is that when we think about identity, we're thinking about it as a username and password. And we need to start thinking outside of that box now. And we need to start thinking of the identity as who you are as a person and what you can do as that person.
Yeah.
It's no longer username and password. We still refer to it as username and password, but we still need to think about it outside of that context, because now it's growing, now it's morphed in this technology world that we live in the cloud, and the way that we access technology. I think that's how we are seeing this shift into moving away. And that's what we call that identity now, because it's your identity. You're Jeff DeVerter. I'm Benjamin Bierna. That's our identity. And we have to use that identity in everything that we do on our day-to-day basis.
And I think that Microsoft's done a pretty decent job also in thinking about how do they model that? Because, I've got my Microsoft identity. And that's an identity that ties back to, I set up, we used to call it Live ID. Remember Live ID?
Absolutely.
And so,
Hotmail accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I never had a Hotmail account. I admit to that.
I still have my original Hotmail account.
I believe it. Is it still at
It's still at Hotmail.
Really? What's the address?
Oh, I will tell you differently.
Nah. Don't you want to get email from our fine friends? Anyway, so I set that up, but now that identity is tied to so many different things. So I've got a personal Office 365 account that I use to make sure I have Office and my Windows systems at home connected and licensed appropriately, and it's that same identity. When I just went to the Evolutions conference over in New Orleans, which was a Microsoft conference, when I registered for that, I registered with that same Live ID. My Azure subscription that I use to do my own testing tied to that same identity, and it seems like all of it is. And I know all of those are different underlying subsystems.
They are.
But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
We are.
Just a little.
Just a little. You know what's nice is that Microsoft has really taken the step on really making the seamless transition of what it looks like from using a Live ID or what they call a Microsoft account to just making it be all things for all people. And I think that's how they've really achieved it, because you don't like to have so many different usernames and passwords. You want to have one identity, just one. Why have more if you can just use one and it can give you and you can grant it the permission?
Because nobody wants to remember different usernames and passwords. Even same username and different passwords, it gets annoying as well.
It does, especially like, if I'm going to this website, then I have to use this one. If I'm going to this website, I have to use this other one. If I'm using this one, it makes it painful for everybody.
But doesn't that create a security vulnerability? So if my one identity connects to all these different things, in fact, there are even other services that will federate out to it. To the same Live ID, if you will. So if that one identity gets compromised, doesn't that compromise everything?
It's true, but at that point, the weakest link is the person, and at that point, it's their password.
So it's not you, it's me.
Yes, exactly. And if you think about it, right, when people like to have easy to remember passwords because of the same reason that they have so many different accounts and IDs all over the world.
Right.
That they just want to say, look, I just want one password for everything because it just makes my life easier, and I don't like to have to remember complex passwords.
Right.
And so it's like, well, how do you take that security context and make it into something a little bit more secure so I can use my one identity?
Yeah.
And that's where we're seeing things like multi-factor authentication come into the play, where you're actually having—
It's a big phrase.
It's a huge phrase. Where now you're actually having to validate that you're actually requesting access to something. And so that multi-factor allows you that extra level of security. Yeah. But it still is the second step on making sure that you generate nice, strong passwords. Right. And what I tell a lot of people that I work with is that when you're thinking about a password, the easiest thing to do is think about a phrase. You don't need one password. You can make it very long. My dog ate my homework is a very good password. It's very long, and
yeah.
And then you just change a couple of
substitutions
characters
along the way, and you got it.
You got it. And so that makes a long password, but it's easy for you to remember. Something that's personal to you. But that's how you guarantee the security. If you're using, if the last time I looked at the reports of the top 10 easiest crack passwords was the number one was password.
Password. Pass that word one, my favorite.
That's right. And so you think about it is why so many people get their accounts compromised is because simple passwords, easy ones that
so you're taking the premise then that yes, it could be perceived to be a security exposure to have one username and password that connects to a whole bunch of stuff. But you're saying it's actually a larger security exposure to have 15 different accounts that have extraordinarily weak passwords, because you don't want to have to remember 15 different things.
You got it.
So you can have one and make it difficult, or get creative in how it is. So I like the idea of my dog ate my homework. The other thing I do is I'll think about a favorite phrase, and I'll just use the first letter from that entire phrase with some character substitution. So my dog ate my homework would be MDAH, and then I'll get creative. Just a little inside the brain. Homework, I'd use 2 letters. H
and W.
And W.
Yeah,
that's right.
There you go.
Grab it by
Very creative. Yeah.
So there are ways to do that, a password cracker is going to have a lot more challenges figuring out how to break.
And that's the whole idea, right? Is we want to make your identity as secure as possible.
Yep.
But yeah, we need to implement some controls internally ourselves of saying, hey, what am I doing that makes me have this exposure that I shouldn't have?
Okay. So this is a really fun conversation, and it is, I'll call it more academic or even just personal. It's how we manage things, on our own as individuals. But when you start to think about this in a business context.
Oh, there we go.
So let's throw this back into a business context. By the way, we're not remotely following the outline we had, but I like the process, even the progression even better. So we think about this in the context of your organization and creating a strategy for your organization, that it makes more sense to find a way to consolidate these different usernames and passwords that the employees have to have in order to have access to the systems they need to do their work. Consolidate that down will actually increase the level of security for for that enterprise data.
Yep.
Okay.
So a lot of times, and I'll put it into some examples that I've had, right, with some of the customers, is that a lot of customers today, their biggest thing that's holding them back are legacy applications, where they have old applications that they haven't modernized to use advantage of some of the newer capabilities that they have to offer. And so when we're thinking about how we can consolidate all of these identities, when you get hired, you get a username and password for your company.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, you need to provide access to those users, either authorizing them or granting them access or assigning them to specific groups.
Yeah.
But the major thing that I've seen with companies is, well, how do I know who has access to what?
So what you're saying is the first issue we're trying to combat is too many usernames and passwords create security vulnerability because it's hard to remember them, and you start writing them on sticky notes under your keyboard. The second issue is access control and knowing who has access to what. Because there are so many different systems, one, it's hard to keep track of who has access to what, but two, to then be able to turn that on and off based on my role inside of an organization.
You got it.
Okay.
Like every single organization is there are so many domain admins.
All right.
I want to start talking technical terms here.
Yeah.
But there's everybody requires domain admins to do their day-to-day job.
So they say.
So I don't need an admin. I don't need to be a domain admin credentials to be able to browse a YouTube video.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense for me to be able to do those day-to-day things. And so when we're talking about that, it's like, well, how do we grant people the privileged identity that they need just in time administration? So if I need to do a domain admin related activity, how can I just request that access to that credential, grant it for a specific amount of time, and then get it revoked? And I can do my time as a regular account.
And so if we can assume there's an IT process around this, not walking up and having somebody type it in, there's an IT process around this that we know who requested access for what, for when, and what period of time.
And what they did with that,
and
what changes did they do? So you're auditing it too.
Yeah.
And that goes back into a lot of the compliance requirements that a lot of companies have. Show me a report of what happened on this particular box?
Yeah.
Who had access to it? When did they have access to it? And what changed when that person accessed that device?
Right.
And so that all ties back to your corporate identity.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to have a way of tying that all in together. Today, a lot of companies don't have the ability of writing that information.
Yeah.
And so we see that we run into issues where we don't have the proper visibility into what's going on to my organization. And that is the biggest thing is not having that visibility. And that's where Microsoft has really put a lot of its resources and efforts into raising that visibility of what's going on within your environment, not only on-premise, but in the cloud.
Okay. All right. Well, now we're getting into some current tooling, but let's step back just a little bit and think about identity. So you and I worked really hard over the past year to create a product called Rackspace Managed Identity.
Absolutely.
And Rackspace Managed Identity is a package of things that ultimately allows Rackspace super smart people to create a federation out into Azure Active Directory and to manage and monitor that over time. But when we started the whole conversation there, there was a lot you had to educate me on, let's be clear. But one of the things you had to do is we had to really think through what is the process of bringing a customer or online in this scenario.
Sure.
And, you've listened to me talk at any point. I'm wanting to get into the action and the activation of it all. But what really needed to happen was before we would engage with a customer around doing, what we needed to do was have a conversation around cloud identity strategy.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So you go and lead some of these workshops.
I do.
What does it mean for a company to think about what is our cloud identity strategy going to be? What are things they have to think about in that context? Because it's not just solving it for the immediate, it's solving it for the foreseeable future.
The foreseeable future. And there's a couple of things that you brought into the conversation. Right? Federation is one, right? That is a very crucial piece of technology.
And we're going to get into the how-tos.
We'll do that a little bit later. And so we'll take that and we'll put that to the side for now.
Yep. This is all strategy.
So the strategy when we first did is like, okay, what do you have today? What are some of the challenges they have with your identities? What is it that you have for your users? What does it have that you have for your partners? What is it that you have for your external users? How are you using those identities? How are you provisioning them? How are you deprovisioning these users? How are you making sure that they only have access to the things that they need access to? And how do you audit or govern these identities that you're using across your organization?
So you're ultimately creating who are my communities of users going to be, and then the old RBAC, role-based access control.
Exactly.
Who needs access to what and when and for how long?
Yep. And so when we lead these ones, so the first thing that we do is that we have to understand the business and what their goals are. What are their business drivers? What are they looking to accomplish? From that, then we take on what we're thinking about. Well, let's do an assessment. Let's see where you are today. Let's see how far away you are from where you need to be able to take advantage of the cloud identities. And we want to get them a phrase that we've coined here, which is cloud ready environment, right? What does your cloud readiness look like from the perspective of having your corporate identities be construed in a form that make them accessible for other cloud providers, not only Microsoft, but all of the other ones?
So a lot of cases, it's not just solving it. It's not just like another resource. It's not another enterprise app that is rolled into the data center and figuring out who in my organization or partners or customers need to have access to this new chunk of data, because it's a much wider, I'll call even infinite, because it's whatever the web is today and its resources and what those might be tomorrow or next week or next year. So it's solving it, and it's also not just solving it for the first hop. Hop being we're trying to solve for Office 365. We want our users and our organization to use their corporate identities to authenticate for getting email through Office 365. Very tangible use case. But once we've unlocked that, Microsoft has done some work around Azure Active Directory and service providers to be able to connect to just a few other providers. The second
other providers. Yeah, and that's where this federation comes in, right? And that's how they're tying all this, because Microsoft is using its Azure Active Directory as sort of this proxy, where it's proxying all of these applications and everything that you need for your identities across all of these platforms for you. Because everybody today, a great majority of the customers that I deal with, they all have Active Directory, but they need to use those identities within Azure Active Directory to be able to use them across every single application that they're using. And they don't want to have a lot of effort to use it, right?
Examples, what applications are you talking about?
So let's say, let's say that we have an application, right? We're building our own application that we want people to register with, or we will have something that we want with our customers or our partners, or we want to share something with them.
So we've written an ordering system where our business-to-business customers can come in and order pallets of the product we provide. And so we want them, and so we have a partnership with them. They have federation on their side, we have federation on our side. We don't want to manage their accounts for them to be able to access our ordering system. So then we say, hey, look, partner, I want you to manage your identities. I'll give you the access that you need.
but we'll just create this federation, and then we'll do the rules that need to be in place for them to be able to access the things that they need within this application.
So you're saying that, so I'm the company selling stuff. I work for acme.com. You work for, Joe's Bait and Tackle.
That's right.
And Joe's Bait and Tackle needs to buy a case of fishing lures. What you're saying is when they log into that system, we don't have to create separate unique identities in our system. Nope. We're going to federate out and say, okay, now Ben at Bob's Bait and Tackle identity, Ben V at bobsbaitandtackle.com has access to this system now.
Yep.
So he can use your identity. So you're
my
still
own
you,
identity
as defined by your organization to get to connect to my system.
You got it.
Very cool.
Another good classic example is I want to create a collaboration website within SharePoint.
Yeah.
How do I give access to my partners?
Yeah.
Right.
This was a lot of work in the old SharePoint days.
Exactly.
And
before
it was a
we used to
licensing
create
train wreck too, by the way.
Oh, it's expensive. You have to create your own domain. You have to create a separate external domain. You have to put your partners over there.
Yep.
You never knew when somebody quit the other company. It was a big mess.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of them out there today that are doing that, which at that point is like, well, how do I leverage something like Azure Active Directory to be my partner broker where I can actually, or my partner proxy where I can use them to just get the access, and I don't have to worry about those identities anymore. It's not my job to worry about my other partners' identities. Now it's my responsibility making sure that they have access to what they need.
Okay, so let's back to Bob's Bait and Tackle, ordering some fishing lures from acme.com.
Yep.
So Ben, you're moving on. You've done a great job at Bob's Bait and Tackle. Now you're going off to Jane's Bait and Tackle.
Yep.
And so when Bob goes into his Active Directory environment and disables your account because you've left, that also means that you can't come in and connect to my system.
Exactly. And so that's the point, right?
Access control.
Well, as soon as that account gets disabled, that means that everything that user has had granted access with all the partners gets disabled simultaneously.
Okay.
So there's a lot of partners, there's a lot of customers out there that they have a 24-hour hard requirement that after 24 hours of somebody leaving the company, you need to let us know.
Yeah. Impossible.
It's just not feasible. It's not scalable. It doesn't work. It's not built into people's processes. And so you have a lot of stale accounts over there that are just creating a mess of things.
Yeah.
And so that's where we come in and we try and identify those ones. That's why I talked about provisioning and deprovisioning.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What does it not look like? Where are the gaps and how do we fill in those gaps? And how do we leverage Azure Active Directory to be that proxy for you?
Okay. All right. So, So let's dig a little deeper there. I've already mentioned the Office 365 scenario, and there are a very finite set of rules around the identities that can authenticate into Office 365. So here we are at Rackspace. Let's assume that we just got provisioned an Office 365 tenant. Now, how can a user authenticate to Office 365?
Okay.
There's really only one way. It's a baited question.
Yep.
It has to come through
Active Directory and Azure Active Directory.
Active Directory.
Correct.
It's the only authentication mechanism that exists.
The only one.
Right. So you're saying, I know you're not, it's a beta question, it's a trick question, that I have to have two identities.
If they're separated, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to have Jeff at on Microsoft.com and then there's Jeff at Rackspace.
If you separate the directories themselves, right?
Well, that sounds like a mess.
It's terrible because at that point it's like, well, wait a minute, I have my own on-premise Active Directory. Why don't I just use the accounts that I have on my Active Directory? And now let me synchronize those up.
Okay, so then I baited, I'm leading him. So what are the two other options that we could use to connect those two Active Directory environments?
Sure. So Microsoft, I've been around the tooling that Microsoft has done for identities to synchronize them to.
We've made that.
Yeah, we made that clear. But they also started out with the tool called DearSync. I mean, it was based off of FIM, which is the Forefront Identity Manager tool. It was very cumbersome to use. It wasn't very user-friendly. It wasn't very...
it was built as a subsystem, not as a thing.
And that's just the tool. But at that point, it's like the tool is very easy to use. The one that they have today, which is the Azure AD Connect tool, which synchronizes your on-premise directory to Azure Active Directory.
Right.
But the problem with that is that it's assuming that you've done everything that you have within your directory to be prepared to be able to do that synchronization.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in, right? There's so many steps that you have to do. For example, Microsoft's old guidance was, hey, don't ever name your Active Directory domain .local or .com, or .net or something that's routable on the internet. That's bad.
Right.
And
now all of a sudden we need it.
Now all of a sudden we need it. So it comes to the point where we have a lot of old practices because the cloud wasn't really where it is today.
Right.
And now we need to come in and say, okay, you can keep your .local. Now we need to add what we call a UPN suffix to your thing, so we can actually say, well, now it's a .com, which is routable, which is being able to be distributed worldwide. And now I can use that one. And so everybody has an email address. Everybody has a, like us, right? It's at rackspace.com.
Yeah.
So that's our email address. That's something that we know. And inside of Active Directory, there's a set of attributes that we have to do to making sure that they're doing. And when you log into Office 365 or Azure AD, you're using an attribute called the user principal name. UPN, exactly. Which is a unique identifier across all your forest.
Okay.
If you have trust and stuff like that, there can only be one. And that's why they picked that
only
one.
one, Jeff.
Yeah. That's why they picked that attribute, because it has to be unique, forest wide.
Okay.
And so once we set up that we match their email address to be the UPN or the user principal name, because that's what everybody knows. They all know their password, because that's what they log in every day with their computer, and they all know their email. So what's the easiest way to make that transition from going from here to the cloud is using their UPN. Yep. And we synchronize that one. And then once we have that all, then we can synchronize that account. Okay. If you don't do that, your account in Office 365 or Azure AD gets the default on Microsoft.com, which means that you have an invalid attribute somewhere. Yeah. And so cleaning that up is a lot more work
than fixing it in the
first place.
Okay.
Exactly.
So before synchronization can be set up, what you're saying is there's a bunch of prep work that has to happen. And granted, it's time consuming.
It is.
But it's not as time consuming and tedious as fixing all the things that get done wrong.
Correct.
Once that's been enabled.
And another example is every time I go into customers, there hasn't been a single AD domain admin, or there hasn't been a single administrator.
Yeah.
They've been through so many cooks, and then so the kitchen's a big mess. There's like, well, this guy wanted to do it this way, this guy wanted to do it this way, this guy wanted to do it that way. And really nobody knows about it, because if you can log in, then everything's good.
Yeah, exactly.
But let me uncover that. And now I'm actually looking and saying, well, this is not the way it should be.
Yeah.
Here are some of the things that are not configured. And the reason why we go and do these assessments is because for it to be successful in the cloud, you need to have a healthy Active Directory.
Right.
And that's just what healthy means, that you're using best practices. You don't have any errors. You don't have any replication errors. You don't have a lot of these errors that are causing you to have issues or going to have issues down the road. And that's why we want to make sure that happens.
Got it. So I like to say that everyone's Active Directory looks an awful lot like their garage, which has fragments of every hobby that you've ever had on the shelves or under the shelves somewhere in there. And just as that's true for the garage, Active Directory has fragments of every policy, of a lot of the different servers that have all been in there and may or may not be there anymore, every user that may or may not have been there, and especially the hallmark of every domain admin that's ever been there. And as you pointed out earlier in the conversation, some people had domain admin that probably shouldn't have had domain admin.
Absolutely.
So you've got to have the on-prem in your data center Active Directory environment healthy and happy before you should even think about synchronization, or we haven't talked about federation yet. But
absolutely.
Before you leave. So back to the way that our product is structured, because it's the right way to go, because, well, that's what Ben said, and he's the smartest guy I know in this, is first a strategy. What is the strategy for the identities that exist on-prem in your environment and relationship to the cloud, both today as well as what's going to happen in the future? Once the strategy's in place, and again, strategy talks about the different communities, who's going to have access to what, how we want to deal with controls, that sort of stuff. And then the next piece is, all right, so that's where we want to be. Now, where are we today? From an internal domain perspective? We call those domain assessments, Active Directory domain assessments. And where you get in, and it's a lot of scripts, it's a lot of poking around, it is sleuthing. You're uncovering. I've looked at some of your reports, these multi-page reports. Okay, I've listened to you read them.
Couple hundred pages.
And you're uncovering even network issues as well.
Absolutely.
So when you've got a larger company that's got multiple locations, and you've got Active Directory domain controllers in these different locations, even the health of the communication path between them and how those paths are set up has a direct impact on, one, the functionality of that internal Active Directory environment. But if you start extending that out into cloud, it just amplifies the issue.
It does. And a lot of times, if you don't do these things up right, you're not going to have the same experience if you had everything nice and clean.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you want to have your user experience the best possible.
Yeah.
Now, what's easier for the administrator, but what's best for your users, the ones that are consuming the service, for your partners and all those ones. And it all starts with having this nice, healthy Active Directory.
Okay.
Where everybody's identity.
So we got a plan. We got a healthy Active Directory. Well, we have a report. Actually, let's be clear. There's a report of it, and then you got to go in and do remediation. And that's going in on everything that gets identified that could be impacting. Admittedly, there's some things that don't necessarily impact it, and they're flagged in yellow and things you should address. But the stuff that could have direct impact on its synchronization or federation out into Azure, out into the cloud, needs to be dealt with before that connection is made.
Absolutely. And so once the remediation, there's what I refer to as the term that we said, cloud ready.
Yeah.
What is the absolute minimum for you to be cloud ready?
Yeah. That
needs to be fixed in order for us to be able to start considering either doing synchronization or federation. And so once we identify what those critical paths are for the remediation, the other things are things that we've identified as problem areas within your Active Directory that if they're not fixed may cause issues down the road.
Yep.
Something that is not in line with the Microsoft's best practices, something that's not aligned with the future or the strategies that you're trying to do with your identities, with your partners.
Yeah.
And so we need to start thinking about these ones as business process improvements, along with preparing your domain to be cloud ready for you to be able to take advantage of.
And so cloud ready is crazy important, not just so that we have a healthy synchronization, not just so that we have healthy federation, but every time I do one of these deep dives, I'll spend a couple of hours in the morning, as I did today, and I'll take our title or a truncated version of it and drop it in the Googles or the Bings and under the news dot whatever, and see what comes back. And for pages upon pages of these. And I snipped a few of them. I don't know if we'll read any of them. But when you look at Active Directory or cloud identity or identity access management, you don't get a lot of detail back or reports back or news things back on, here's a cool way to do it. Here's a company that's doing it in an interesting way. 99.9% of the time, this is a factual based thing that is my experience this morning, is that it's coming back in the context of, if you want to have secure cloud applications, you have to have your cloud identity and access management story Loctite before you go and do it.
100% agree with that.
And it's taken the top list of so where was this one? I do want to tell you this one. So read an article in Business Wire. There's an activity or a conference coming up beginning of June in New Orleans called the Cloud Identity Summit. General Petraeus is going to come and talk to this and talk about somebody who cares about identity and security. General Petraeus is coming to this, and the title of the entire conference is the revolution of security. It starts with identity. So a multi-day conference is all about dealing with security from an identity perspective. And there's example after example out there on this.
There is. And a lot of things that people don't realize is that it's not just a technology piece that you have to do. It's a business process improvement. And so that's a big thing, right? Because that's a big chunk of work.
Because technology is easy to install.
It is.
Business process, human behavior change, not easy to install.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But that's why we call them out, right? Is because these are processes that have to be in place.
Yeah.
And that summit just validates that, right? Is that they have to have these processes in place for you to be successful and having anything to do with IAM in the cloud.
Yep. Another article that I found, it was in InfoWorld, and it was posted by David Lithincombe with Cloud Technology Partners, a Rackspace strategic partner, as of last week. So he was talking about the three career trends. So if you're setting yourself up for success in 2017, in other words, your career's cooking along in IT, what should you be looking at? Of the three that he listed, one of them, the middle one, was cloud identity and access management to meet compliance. If you have that skill set, you are in demand next year. This year, we're starting to get, everybody's getting their cloud identity story together. But as you start to have professionals who can implement, who can design and implement those strategies around cloud identity, especially in the context of meeting compliance, you're golden there. Other examples were things around machine learning and then cloud operations at managed scale.
Agree. And a lot of one of the good things about choosing like a partner like Rackspace to do it is that because we have so much interaction with our customers and what we've seen them
Yeah.
go along. And I've had the privilege of being a consultant for many, many, many years,
Yeah.
that I've seen so many things out there that I've learned a lot, and I've taken a lot of what I've seen companies do well,
Yeah.
and what companies don't do well, and adjust those ones, and for each one of the customers that we deal with.
Yeah.
Is how do we build these things together as a partner to making sure that you're having the right strategy going forward?
Because it's not just, if we get identity wrong, it doesn't mean that our users just have a bad experience. If it would be so simple, it wouldn't be such a big deal. Because that's the way it was 10 years ago. That's the way it was 5 years ago.
Yep.
But now when we think about cloud scale and we think about these applications and the strategy from identity and access management strategy that deals with that's holistic, both inside of our data center and outside of the data center, it is the greatest point, I would say, outside of a trusty firewall, the greatest point of exposure to the data that's going in these applications.
Agree. And if you think about it, before, when 5 years ago, like we're saying, identity used to just be within the confines of your organization.
Right.
It was in this little bubble that nobody
you get
that
it
never
wrong, you had
escaped.
some annoyed users, but that was the extent of it.
Yeah. And everybody learned to deal with those annoyances. Well, now I got to do this over here, and I have to do this over here. And I just learned because that's the way it's always been.
And the ball of twine got bigger and bigger.
Yeah. But now when you're talking about exposing those identities into the cloud, well, now you have a worldwide presence.
Yep.
And you need to have somebody that you trust that's going to have those identities and what you're going to do with those ones.
Yep.
And that's where we run into these huge critical issues about identity. Now it's at a global scale. Now you're not inside your bubble anymore.
Yeah.
Now you're outside in the entire world.
Yeah. So let's rewind a few minutes. We were talking about this in the context of extending our Active Directory out into Azure Active Directory for the sole purpose of enabling Office 365 for our organization.
Yep.
So we could either completely duplicate those identities. So we have identities on-prem and we have identities out in Azure Active Directory, and we have to manage both of them independently. Change password here, it does not change here. I could be Jeff D here, I could be Jay Diverter out there. They're just separate. We don't want that. Small companies will tend to do that just because they'll abandon on-prem and they'll just do it all online, which is a good idea.
Yeah.
But then when we start talking about wanting to connect online Active Directory to on-prem Active Directory, you mentioned we have synchronization.
Yep.
But there's one other way to do that.
And there's federation. And the difference between synchronization and federation is where the authentication actually takes place. So there's two different ways that the authentication takes place.
Okay.
One of those ones is you have a synchronized identity that gets synchronized into Azure AD.
Yep.
What happens is that there's a hash of your password that gets sent up into Azure AD.
Okay.
It's not your actual password.
Right.
It's not something that somebody can take away and tear it apart and decode
reverse engineer
and reverse engineer it, because it's a hash of your password that's in AD. So from that standpoint, but at that point, when you are authenticating into, let's say, Office 365, to put it into an easy example, when you log in with a synchronized identity, when you put in your username and password, you are just authenticating right there locally in that person.
I'm authenticating in Azure Active Directory when we synchronize.
When you synchronize.
Okay.
Federation is the opposite. Now it's just a copy of your identity in the cloud, but there is no hash of any password. There's nothing else like that. It says, hey, if you need to authenticate this user, why don't you go back into AD and ask that information, and then just give me back a token. Okay. And so that token
thumbs
gets
up
back.
Or thumbs down.
Good
for this long, no good, don't let them in.
And so it's a specific token that just lets them in. So the token is just a string that says that went through the federation in the back, that actually took that user count, authenticated against the local AD, created a token off of that one, and send it back into Azure Active Directory.
That seems to me there are pluses and minuses to each of these. So when we think about synchronization, the first thing that comes to my mind from a benefit is the fact that I don't have to ride a WAN link of some fashion from Azure Active Directory back into the corporate prem. So if for some reason corporate on-prem is offline, who knows, they lost power, UPSs were down, then people working from home or from remote sites would not be able to authenticate into Office 365.
If they had a federation, correct.
If they're federation.
If they were federation.
If they're federated. But in a synchronized world, it doesn't matter. They're all right there.
Yeah.
Now, from a control perspective, I'm curious about the synchronization timing.
Yep.
Because if let's say that I'm working for Bob's Bait and Tackle,
Yep.
and you left to go work for Jane's Bait and Tackle, you put in notice, left the same day. They fire these sales guys right away, get them out the door. They don't want to take corporate secrets, and they say disabled at 9:00 on Monday morning. When does it get disabled out in Azure?
Sure. So before it used to be 3 hours,
Okay.
and now it's 30 minutes.
Okay, so that's not terrible.
So it's not terrible. They've improved it tremendously.
Yeah.
But you still have that lag time, right? There's still that time before the user gets disabled, before it gets disabled everywhere. With Federation, when you disable that user, it's instantly disabled everywhere.
Because Azure Active Directory is going to ride whatever WAN links that exist, whether it's straight internet pipes or dedicated circuit, back into the corporate domain, and ask the corporate on-prem Active Directory server, are we going to letting Ben at Bob's Bait and Tackle in?
Exactly. And at that point, it's like the user's disabled. There's no way they can do it, and it'll deny it right off the bat.
And as Microsoft adds more and more services that are tied to the same authentication scheme, what you have is a greater and greater exposure. That 30 minutes could mean a lot more when you talk about Microsoft Dynamics, when you talk about gobs of OneDrive data or SharePoint data that might exist out there with corporate presentations, pricing, relationships, all sorts of what could be intellectual property for Bob's Bait and Tackle.
You got it.
Name the company.
You got it.
So that actually becomes quite an exposure.
It does, and there's two different things
even though it's only 30
well.
minutes.
Yeah, and there's different on the user experience as well.
Okay.
Let me explain that in two ways. Synchronized identity is if you consider a user that has, where there's same sign-on.
Yep.
Where they're logging into the applications with the same username and password that they do on-premise. So they still have to input something into a username and password dialog box to get access to those ones. That is synchronized, which is the same thing as same sign-on. With federated identity, now at that point, it's called single sign-on, which means that you don't have to put any password in. You just go to these special links that get created for your federated application, and you're instantly into those applications. There's no username or password. It does it all automatically behind the covers, and you're just into that application. Okay. And so it creates a better user experience for the users, a more seamless, and it's able to integrate with so many other systems out there, so many diverse ecosystems. Examples. If we look at Salesforce, right? Salesforce is a very mature product with a long identity. Tying it into those ones where they have federation is based off of the SAML open protocols. Yeah. And so it just ties in the transition between the identity between both of them in a very seamless fashion. So if I go to Salesforce, I just automatically get logged in. Yeah. Same thing for a lot of all the other big names out there. So that's end user experience, kind of a good thing. But now, you leaving Bob's Bait and Tackle as a sales guy. Yep. I really care that when I turn you off in on-prem Active Directory, that you don't get any more access to Salesforce.com. Absolutely. That's huge. That's huge. And at the same time, you're getting a complete audit trail of what that user account did. Yeah. That you don't get with on-premise, right? Now using this proxy, it's going to log everything that happens. Yeah. It's going to provide a report for you. It's going to provide all of this information for you that says, hey, I disabled this user, yet he still access X, Y, and Z, and here's the things that he did in those X, Y, and Z places. And in real time, as from a management perspective, I have the ability to say who in my company has access to what. So from an individual perspective, run a report, click the button that says, what does Ben have access to right now? Or give me a list of everybody who has Salesforce access, Concur access, Workday access, or any of the other couple of 3,000 providers they have in there. And you get reports. You get to see how many people are using that application. Right. So if you're providing a service to your users, and nobody uses it, well, then now you have the data behind this says that, hey, nobody's using this, so does it worth the investment of my time to be paying for something that nobody's using? Well, the other thing I think is really cool, so you're looking at it from a context of who has access to what, and I can also control licensing that way as well. Yep. But also there's some tooling that you can put in place at the perimeter inside of an organization that says, what else are people logging into? Yep. And then put those things, not so we can just say, hey, no, you shouldn't be using GitHub or name some other SaaS provider in there, but say, actually, let's change that to be authenticating through Azure Active Directory as an authentication endpoint so that, again, who's accessing what, when, and why. Not necessarily why. But. Yeah. And that's what all that reporting comes into play. They're very nice. The reports are so granular to the level we can actually say, you know, what was changed in a specific document. That was like, if they have something on OneDrive, hey, what did actually change within this document? What is the version control? Did they actually change something?
Yeah.
Or you can get like, this user logged in from this location, and he only logs in for this one. So we take advantage of what Microsoft has done with their Azure Active Directory at the global scale.
Yep.
And take advantage of the machine learning that says, okay, hey, Jeff, you're traveling. So I'm going to flag you because this week you've been authenticating from San Antonio.
Yeah.
Hey, but guess what? You just went over to Europe and now you authenticate from over there. But that seems odd because you just authenticate in San Antonio. Travel time to Europe
is a little longer than instantaneous.
Correct. And so that gets flagged.
Yeah.
If you don't have a good IAM solution that's flagging that for you, it's kind of hard to know that that's happening.
Yeah. So that's, you know, when you think about those careers that I listed earlier, this being one of them that is awesome for today. And of course, for next year, machine learning. And, you know, I hear machine learning, you think, what, do you make my computer be smarter? That's not what machine learning means. Machine learning means taking hyper amounts of data at scale and watching the trends and patterns. So is my identity authenticating from, geographically speaking, from only one location, or am I in two locations when we know that can't be the case, or am I distributed across the world, showing even a larger potential issue? And then not only being able to report on that, reports are nice and all, but what I care about are actions being taken along that. So when you see suspicious activity, now actions can, in an automated fashion, take place. In other words, let's disable my account until the real Jeff Diverter raises his hand and says, I'm over here. Okay, fix up your username and password.
Change your password because somebody challenged it, right?
Yep.
And at that point, and that's where the beauty comes into this, because you don't have those capabilities on premise today.
Yeah.
But if you take Azure Active Directory, you do have those ones. So like if we have an automation process, which Azure Active Directory does have today, that says that, hey, you're in Europe, I can make a remediation, say that, okay, disable Jeff's account and have him either change his password or have him do a dual authentication, a multi-factor authentication, saying that he is actually there.
Yeah.
And if not.
So let's define multi-factor authentication just super quick.
So multi-factor authentication is that not only do you need to know your username and password, but it's something that you have as well.
Okay.
Which means that you're carrying around your smartphone. You're carrying around a little chip that has a 6-digit code usually. Yeah. Or you can get a text message from somebody that says, hey, Jeff Diverter requested permission or requested access application. Yep. Here's the code, and put in that code, or you can have it, or you can type in the code, or you can press a button on your application. Depends on how you set it up. Yeah. But it gives you that extra step that says, okay, somebody knows my username and password, but they still need to go to the other layer of the multi-factor.
So tangible example, whenever I log into my live account, I keep it live account, username details, account details, if I'm logging in from a computer or a device where I've never done that before, it comes back and says, hey, I see you put in the right username and password, but we need to just verify you are who you say you are. Do you want to use your email or do you want to use your phone? And they'll send me a code that I then have to enter. So it's a tangible way to say, okay, the person who's holding this thing is going to be the one who's going to be able to truly finish the authentication method.
Yeah, and some of the other things that Microsoft has done really nicely that I really enjoyed is that now that you have these cloud identities, well, you also have cloud administrators. Well, now you have the ability to make multi-factor requirement for the administrators, because now you have now these domain admins are in the cloud now, but now you need to have this extra layer of security.
Because they have their span is so much greater, we can force, based on role, a different authentication mechanism.
You got it. And so it just makes, and so we keep adding these layers of security that improve the business overall exposure to those.
Could you ever seen it going here in 2001 when you thought, I think identity is important?
You know, no, because I was always thinking about, it would be cool if we could do so much more with this.
Sure. Because you saw the potential, but the use cases weren't necessarily.
They weren't there. The technology wasn't there, the ability to do it. So it was like, and that's why one of the cool things that Rackspace does here is it shows you what is your top 5 strengths.
Yeah.
My number 1 one is futuristic. I was too forward thinking about all the time. So I was like, oh man, that is so cool if we could do X, Y, and Z.
Now it's all coming.
Now it's all coming. I'm like, look, it actually does. It actually makes sense.
But we've just finished this part of the conversation talking about these really interesting use cases around. We've got our identities federated out into Azure. We have Azure connected to into Salesforce, into all these other connectors. So we have a single sign-on user experience, seamless sign-on is the way I even like to say it, into these other SaaS-based providers that are not Microsoft applications at all, but providing us control and reporting, and not only that, but automated tools. And it all goes back to how clean is your Active Directory?
It all starts. It all starts.
And it hinges on that. And I pushed,
Yep.
we were working on this product. I pushed hard. You kept coming back going, it's going to take X amount of hours per machine. It's going to be lengthy. It's going to be hard. It's going to be, a very big process to do. And I say, really? Does it have to be? And you kept saying, yeah, it has to be. Because ultimately, if you don't have that synchronization or federation healthy and working well, everything beyond it just is broken.
And it's going to create a bad user experience. At the end of the day, right, what we try and do is not only have a nice, healthy one, but also provide the best user experience for your users, right? It should be something that's seamless for them to consume.
Right.
It shouldn't be so complicated that it doesn't make them want to use your services that you're providing as a business.
Right.
And that's where we like to come into play, is like, it all starts with making sure that your Active Directory is healthy, that your business processes are in place.
And
here's the things that you need
strategy.
to think of. Yeah. And here's the things they need to be thinking about. And here's your roadmap of what you need to do at X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
You can't start all of a sudden do everything cloud, because you're not ready for that.
Yep.
You have to grow into it, right? You have to learn.
And, in all honesty, we put in this whole process. So there's the evaluation and then remediation. But before that was that strategy stuff.
Strategy.
And the strategy is
exactly.
also where you're kind of painting the pie in the sky. Okay, since Mr. Organization, since you are doing these few things this way, wouldn't it be great if you could do all this? Yes, it would be great if I could do all this other stuff. Okay, part of that is just to soften the blow of the amount of work, the time that it just takes to get things cleaned up. But we've never seen anybody not sign up for the work.
Exactly.
And well, just be fair, I mean, the expense that goes into that as well, because the reward, both in mitigation of security, management of the data, and then security or seamless user experience is worth the price.
And not only that, is that because if you think about the workload that a lot of the administrators have today, I mean, they don't have enough time to go and learn something new,
right?
Or they don't have time to fix things that they do because they're busy doing so many other stuff that the business is demanding on top of them. And so when we come in,
not
and
everybody has a certified master.
Not everybody's a Microsoft certified master that's seen it all and done it all. And nice plug for myself, right?
Yeah, I like it.
But it's true, right? Is that we've seen it all. We've understand it all. We've really got into the depths of where we can really have a really nice cloud strategy for you, and develop that, and not only provide you that roadmap or that level of expertise to make you successful in the cloud, but also successful in providing the services that you need for your users.
And then lastly, piece of the product plug, we'll manage those connections and that experience over time.
We will.
At the both on the on-prem side out into Azure AD. Anything in closing, Ben? We're coming up towards the end of our time that you think we needed to cover that we're not, that somebody needs to think about as they think about this cloud identity experience.
So I think that it's really crucial for people to understand that going to the cloud provides you a lot of benefits. It's not easy. Things change on such a rapid basis that it's time for you to look at a partner that you trust and that you can move with to walk you along that cloud strategy, to walk along that journey along with you. Because that is our job, right? Our job is to making sure that we provide you the right strategy for the right period of time and the right growth where you are right now in your technology world, and how we can be there for you to address and making sure that you have a good, solid basis for identity.
Right. Awesome. So cloud identity, incredibly important for security. It is an awesome job career if you're looking for how to adjust your career a little bit and have a great future. And then it is absolutely required in consuming any of these other applications at scale, whether that be Salesforce, whether it be 365. And the one last piece that we really didn't touch on is a lot of these major providers will enable federation for you. In other words, you can federate your Active Directory out into Salesforce, and you can federate out into any number of other providers. The problem is now you're managing multiple federation endpoints. Challenging when you're federating out just out into Azure Active Directory, you can allow them to manage that last mile and be able to report and be able to take action and so forth.
And then you have to learn about SAML assertions and SAML language and how that plays in and debugging it. So it's a lot of nice stuff. I think that would be a good deep dive to just really talk about federation and really understand what it is under the covers and how complicated it really is.
Yep. All right. If we want to do that, send a note or contact us at Rackspace, and we'll be happy to let Ben talk about that. All right. I'm Jeff DeVerter at Rackspace.
I'm Benjamin Villanueva.
And we're talking to you today about Azure Active Directory and cloud authentication. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon on the next deep dive.